All right, welcome AP Language. I wanted to make a quick video of to give you some feedback on your essays. So I'm borrowing one of your peers' work um, from this past essay to talk about briefly. Um, so overall, the essay, this one follows the structure of um, the template that we went over, but I do want to point out a few things. So I want to start with the thesis here. It says the speaker argues that there are many different types of ways to speak English. So that itself is not really an argument. That's more of like a statement. It's more of a fact versus opinion. The argument in this essay actually shows up here. It says the value and credibility of what someone has to say does not lessen because of the type of English they speak. So this is actually where the writer states their argument. And so it's okay that these are three different sentences. They go on to say it's all English no matter the accent. It may be more effective if it was put into a single sentence. But either way, it's a solid thesis when taken all together. And they definitely have that statement there. So good. I want to talk about the line of reasoning. You need to have a thesis statement. You don't necessarily need to have a line of reasoning, but it definitely helps. It helps the reader know your organization. It helps you know how you're going to organize your essay. The line of reasoning here is this. Three primary rhetorical strategies that the speaker employs to achieve this argument are logos, which shows us what Tan's mother goes through, ethos, which builds her credibility and trust with the audience, and pathos, which makes us sympathize with her mother. So that's good, but you'll notice over here, I wrote, notice how the order in the line of reasoning is logos, ethos, pathos, right? Logos, ethos, and pathos. But if you look at the essay, check out what this person does. They start with ethos, and then they go into pathos, and they end, well, I cut it out, but it ends with logos. So you don't want to do that. You want to maintain the same structure from your line of reasoning in the rest of your essay. And I like how this person started with ethos. I think that's important. I think building credibility is always the primary part of the rhetorical triangle. And ending with pathos is usually, if you're going to do that, probably the best way to do it. But then again, it's totally up to you. But I do like the way this works here. I also wanted to make note of syntactical variety. So this right here, where it says in the beginning, the speaker's primary rhetorical strategy, in the middle, the speaker's primary rhetorical strategy. So even though on the outline, I think that's more or less what it asks you to write, which is totally fine. It's not going to earn you the sophistication point though, because there is no syntactical variety. That's not variety, right? It's like two roses, right? Two dandelions. In other words, like give me a rose and give me a dandelion. Switch it up a little bit. Give me a different kind of like way of saying things. So check out how I revised this. I wrote here, try to switch up your syntactical variety. Notice how each paragraph begins the same way. You can instead say something like, so instead of saying in the beginning, the speaker's primary rhetorical strategy, say something like the speaker begins her essay by establishing credibility as a writer. The speaker then shifts into, right, using pathos in order to elicit sympathy. Okay, so try to figure out how can you, as a writer, take more control of your language, because you'll notice the same thing kind of happens in the body paragraphs, right? So you have that, you have an example of this strategy is, and then the quote, and then you say this example supports the speaker's argument because, well, check out this, right? You have the same topic sentence, and it says an example of this is, so same wording really, right? You have the quote. This one does change it up a little bit, but I've noticed in a lot of the essays, you pretty much are just using that same exact language, and even though that can earn you a 4 on this essay, 4 points, it's definitely not gonna get you a higher score, like a sophistication point. So you want to switch up your, syntactical variety a little bit to make it sound like you're a writer, that you know what you're talking about. Otherwise, it just sounds like you're using a form, and that's fine for now. Okay, but later on, as you grow and develop as a writer for this type of essay, think about how else can you say this. How else can I say an example of a strategy is, right? There's different ways to do it. And then finally, let's see here. I wrote here, be more specific here. So yeah, another thing I want to point out in your topic sentence is it's important that you are very specific with what you're going to be, delving into that paragraph. So for example, this person says, in the middle, the speaker's primary rhetorical strategy is pathos. First of all, another thing you could say is like in paragraph 4, the speaker shifts into eliciting sympathy or something like that. So I said here, the speaker then shifts into eliciting sympathy from the speaker by demonstrating that everyone speaks a number of Englishes. So that's again another way to switch up your syntactical variety. The only problem with this, and that's, this makes sense, but I don't really know what kind of pathos you're referring to. I know up here you state she makes us sympathize with her. So maybe tell us how in the topic sentence. So for example, say that she elicits sympathy by doing such and such of a thing, right? By demonstrating that everyone speaks a number of Englishes, right? Everyone does what her mother does and what she does. That, I think you don't have to explain it too much, but that implies that we can connect with her, which is what sympathy is. Let's see here. Finally, I wrote here, many of these essays earned a 3 on evidence and commentary as a result of not fully explaining your ideas and how the evidence supports the thesis. So even though the commentary here is actually pretty good, the commentary on the second example is hard to follow. And for the evidence and commentary on the rubric, um, a 3 basically says that the commentary is limited. So I want to show you what that means. Um, this person says another example of this, right, strategy of pathos is the following quote. My mother has long relied actually, I'm not even sure what that is. The limitations of her English as well when I was 15. So copying the quote correctly probably will help. When I was 15, she used to have me call people on the phone to pretend I was she. Okay, so interesting quote. Let's see what this person does with it. Amy sees her mother's tongue as perfect and full of imagination. So I'm confused here. Her mother's tongue as perfect and full of imagination, but this is not a quote from her mother. This is what her mother's asking her to do. So I'm a little confused of what exactly your definition of her mother's tongue is. Or this is not her language. This is her imagination. So yeah, I'm a little confused here what that means. It has texture to it. What has texture? Where's the texture that she's like having her daughter call, right? Like people for her. I'm a little confused here. The world might find something wrong with her tongue, but she does not. Again, I'm not really sure what you're referring to by tongue. Um, you could say something like her mother shows, imagination in her ways of, finding, in the way she finds means to communicate with people. But the commentary is really not clear, and I'm not sure how that connects back to the thesis statement and the eliciting sympathy, which is this whole paragraph. How does this example show pathos? So I wrote here some questions that a reader is going to ask. Another example of what exactly? So just saying like another example of the way she elicits sympathy, or saying in a more sophisticated way. How does this example demonstrate that her mother's tongue is full of imagination? Why would the world find something wrong with this tongue, quote unquote? And is this even an example of her mother's speech? I don't think it is. I'm a little confused here. So you're making the reader work way too hard to figure out what your point is, and that's going to be very limiting in terms of the score you get. So you're definitely going to be ending up with a 3, even though there's a couple examples and there is some commentary, and I could probably assume that I think I know what you're talking about, but ultimately I don't. So those are some notes, and I noticed these types of things happening on a lot of essays, which is why I wanted to make this short video to make sure that I went over it, because next week we're going to be talking about writing our own narratives, so we're not going to be doing much with the rhetorical analysis essay for at least a good solid week. So hopefully that makes sense. And otherwise, the essays were really great and organized, and I gave you some feedback on the updates, so take a look at that because it applies to most people's writings. I did not give you too much specific feedback. We'll get more into that later on. Alrighty, hope you guys have a great weekend.